So I want to talk about the research that we did that we published in our book, Cracking the Sales Management Code. And I think it aligns very closely with the philosophy of ambition. And we've had a lot of conversations with them, just discussing the kind of the ways that our philosophies work together. Uh, but the research was all driven by a single question, which is kind of funny to think about. It's been a while now. I think this was probably back in 2007. Then I was at the global headquarters of a large financial services company. I was up in Manhattan and was talking to a mid-level sales leader, and he said that he'd been in the room with the global head of sales for the entire company the week before. We were just making small chat before another meeting, and he said that the global head of sales asked a very interesting question. He said to a large room, he said, "How do I know if my sales force is actually any good?" And so it's a rhetorical question, but the global head of sales went on to describe. He said, so I have sales forces all around the world. They sell a bunch of different products to a bunch of different customers. And how do I know if a sales force is really any good? So, how do I know if my North American sales force is any good? Is it because my North American sales are accelerating faster than my European sales? Well, I don't know. What products do I sell in North America? And who are the competitors? And what's the regulatory environment for the financial services that we sell? Or if one product team is selling at a faster rate than another product team, does that mean that it's a better sales force, or does it just mean they have a better product? And so it's kind of an interesting question that he posed, and one of those questions is just, everyone has questions like this to just kind of get under the skin. And whenever you have a moment alone when there's not a world of distractions, you start thinking about it, and it really began to pester me. And so I want to share with you kind of where we took this question, how we answered it, and what the implications are for sales management. But let me just take a quick moment first to introduce you to Vantage Point. Many of you this may be the first time that you've seen what we do. So Vantage Point is a sales training company at our core. I mean, if you imagine every sales training company you've ever seen, but you imagine that we're the best sales training company you've ever seen, and you imagine that we only focus on sales management, then that's kind of the way we like to be known. We focus on sales managers and second line sales management because we think those are the people in the organization that really have the greatest effect on sales performance. So if you leave this knowing only one thing about Vantage Point, know that we're a sales training company focused exclusively on developing sales management teams. And we do this by conducting a lot and publishing a lot of research. I'm going to talk about the book there, Cracking the Sales Management Code, which I co-authored with one of my partners, Michelle Bazana. But we've done a lot of research, and we publish a lot of different places, which obviously this is credentialing. But just to point out that the research we do is interesting and incredible, but also that it's differentiated. Not a lot of companies are focused on sales managers in the way that we are, and we're proud to have brought some interesting insights to the marketplace. The third of the four things I'll share with you here is that we're very focused on execution. If you have sales managers in your organization or sales leaders, it's possible that they've gotten trained on some generic coaching models, or leadership training is very popular. But we're very focused on the execution by the sales manager. So our programs aren't leadership, or I'm doing air quotes, leadership or coaching, but very applied to tasks that managers engage in, like coaching the sales pipeline or creating forecasts. Or I'll share with you in a second kind of the content and the sales management code here. And the final thing I'll say is that we get great results with the clients we work with. So these are just some we pulled out of a hat. 30% revenue increase in one region we worked with of a large company, increasing the number of reps at quota by 20%, increasing the win rate across a large company, global company, by 20%. And the interesting thing here is that not that any other sales training company wouldn't say the same thing, but we got these results without ever training a salesperson. And so we think the sales managers are kind of a hidden source of ROI for a lot of companies, because it doesn't make sense almost that if you want your salespeople to sell better, train their sales managers. The first place you would go, obviously, is to train your salespeople and to enable your salespeople. But what we found is, without training any salespeople, you can get salespeople to perform substantially better just by focusing on their managers, because if they're motivated and they understand what they're doing, then they can really drive performance in your sales force. And here's just some eye candy, a logo chart here to show that we have worked with some pretty large companies. And again, it's more to say that we've come along in the last 5 or 6 years and put out some interesting content and some innovative training programs that companies like GE or 3M who have been training their salespeople and their sales managers for decades, they still find it very interesting and compelling. And so in a short amount of time, we've kind of gotten some world-class clients that we're pretty proud to talk about. But let me get back to the research here, because that's why we're here. So as I said, this question kind of started bouncing around in my head. How do we know if my sales force is any good? Is it because they make quota? Well, maybe not. The guy from the global head of sales said, if quota is the measure of success, then I can make every salesperson succeed or fail tomorrow by reassigning their targets. And so we thought about this quite a bit and determined, what if we just started collecting management reports? So what if we started collecting a bunch of management reports from our clients and other folks who'd be willing to participate in the study? And let's just see how people are measuring their sales forces. Because if a company is measuring, if they're collecting and reporting data on their sales force, the assumption is this is their measure of good, right? If you're collecting data on revenue growth or products sold or customers acquired, and you're reporting that back to the field, you're basically saying this is the way we're measuring the goodness of your performance. And so we gathered from a few dozen pretty large companies, from the IBMs and GEs that I mentioned, all the way down to some mid-sized companies. We just gathered their sales management reports, and we looked at how they were measuring and how they were declaring good, if you will, in the sales force. And the research ended up being this book called Cracking the Sales Management Code, which has at this point been out for about 5 years, and it's been pretty revolutionary for a lot of companies. First, because there's not a lot of attention, as I said, given to sales management, other than a textbook, which is pretty unreadable. But the frameworks and the ideas are approachable and simple and useful. And so I'm going to share with you here some of the most basic frameworks that are in the book, but some of the most powerful ones as well. And
hey, Jason, this is Travis. Can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, Travis, I can. Welcome.
Awesome. Great to hear. Sorry again for the delay on my end. Hey, I just wanted to let everybody know, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to ask, and I can monitor everything and kind of relay them back to Jason. So didn't mean to interrupt, but just wanted to kind of get that out there so we can, make this as conversational as the audience wants.
Yeah, jump in at any time, Travis, with comments or questions of your own. So
awesome, thanks.
So we gathered all these management reports. So here's the story. So we gathered a bunch of management reports, and we were expecting to find some best practices. So we expected, if we looked at large companies who have had, 5 years ago, 2002, I guess, these large companies have probably gone through a dozen iterations of CRM. And for decades before that, they were still doing management reporting. It just wasn't automated in the same way. And so we thought, look, if we study a bunch of large companies, they'll figure this out. And we'll identify some best practices, so to speak, of how to arrange and use data to manage the sales force, to drive toward better goodness, if you will. And what we found was absolute chaos. We found that no company really had it figured out. Well, first we discovered that it wasn't uniform across different companies. And then we started to identify, well, which is the best way to do this in our perspective? And we found that really none of them were sufficient. So what we did is we took all this data and we pared it down to 306 metrics that were common. That weren't common, but 306 metrics across all of these companies. And then we got those 306 from thousands of metrics. So if a company was measuring revenue 10 different ways, we just said, okay, there's a measure of revenue. Or if they were measuring market share in 4 or 5 different ways, we just said, okay, they're measuring market share. So we took thousands of data from dozens of companies, and we pared it down to 306 metrics. And so just going down the left side here, you'll recognize a lot of these metrics. You track them in your own companies, I'm sure. Revenue, right? Revenue growth, revenue performance relative to target, the volume of products that you're selling, or call outcomes, or are calls advancing, or from stage to stage in the sales process, or are the deals dying? Ramp up time for new sales people, new sales hires. The amount of territories that are being covered, are tools being used, is CRM being utilized, are sales managers coaching? And how are the sales people allocating their time across different regions or different types of customers, right? New customers versus existing? So there's all these ways that we measure sales performance. And so when we started thinking about how to organize this ourselves, you always have to have a guiding question, right? So if you put a bunch of marbles on the table, 100 marbles, and you decide to organize them, you have to have an organizing framework, right? You have to organize them by size, or by color, or by opaque versus clear. I mean, you can't just organize things. You have to have some guiding principle. And so the guiding principle that we chose, our guiding question here to make sense of all these metrics, was simply, can we manage this metric? And again, we're looking at this from the perspective of a sales manager. So if I'm a sales manager, and you're giving me all these reports every week, or I'm logging into CRM to see these reports every week, There's kind of this implicit assumption that I, as a manager, I'm going to do something to change those metrics. I'm going to manage the numbers, so to speak. So if you tell me that my customer retention is 85%, then there's kind of the implicit assumption I'm going to do something with that data. I'm going to take some action or some management action to make that 86%, 87%, 88%. And when you report my performance to quota, you're basically saying, I want you to perform better, right? If you're below your quota, we want you to get to quota. If you're at quota, we want you to continue to drive past it. And so it's kind of an interesting question that we report all these data points to the sales field, but is it really a fair thing to ask that they manage these metrics? I mean, can we manage metrics, right? That even these things that we're determining goodness of our sales force is using. So we went literally piece by piece, 306 times, 306 metrics, and we asked the question, can we manage this metric? And some of them we pretty quickly determined no. Can you manage revenue? Well, we talk about it a lot. We frequently say, hey, we need to do a better job this quarter of managing revenue. But in reality, we can't manage it. If we could manage revenue, every salesperson would make their quota. And another one's market share, especially in marketing departments. We talk a lot about managing market share. We do a better job this year of managing our market share. You can't manage market share. If you could manage market share, the first person to market would have a monopoly. And they never give it up, because who would want to share their market? So some of these are things that we measure and we pay a lot of attention to. It's interesting that we really can't manage them, such as revenue or quota achievement. And then we found that some things actually we could manage, and these were very satisfying measures. So the number of accounts assigned to a salesperson, can you manage that number? Well, of course you can. We reassign accounts all the time, right? We redesign territories, we hire salespeople and carve out accounts for them. So reassigning accounts is no big deal. Or how about the type of calls the salespeople are making, whether they're making prospecting calls or making calls on existing customers, service calls maybe, or relationship calls? Well, sure, as a sales manager, you should be able to guide your salespeople to make more calls here or there. If you want your salespeople to make more prospecting calls as a sales manager, it's reasonable to think you can just ask them to make more prospecting calls. And you might run into some compliance issues here and there, but that's fine. I mean, that's why one reason you have management is to make sure that the salespeople are executing. So some of the metrics you can manage, believe it or not. Some you can't manage, believe it or not. But interestingly, I was looking back at some of this research the other day. I was just on the computer and found some of the original analysis I was doing. And originally I thought there would be manageable and unmanageable metrics. And that was the way I was going through it. So is this metric manageable? No. Is this metric manageable? Yes. But somewhere along the way, we found this third type of metric that was a little bit vexing. So take customer retention, for example. So if I'm retaining 85% of my customers and I want to increase that number this year, can I manage that? Can I do something to increase customer retention? Well, you clearly can't make someone be your customer, right? I mean, they have to agree to be a customer. They have to agree to be retained. But there are some things that you can do, right? So if I decide that these 4 or 5 customers this year I really need to retain and they're at risk, I can do some things. I can start paying more attention to them. I can call on them more frequently. I can engage higher in their organization, and try to build those relationships and make sure that we're aligned strategically so that we don't separate. But I can't make them be a customer. Or another good one is if you launch a new product line this year and you want to sell more of your new product. Well, you can't make someone buy your product, and you can't just manage that. But there's stuff you can do. You can change the nature of the conversations that your salespeople are having, or you can target customers that are more likely to buy that product set. So it was kind of this middle layer of metrics that was, I can't manage this, but I feel like I can influence it if I just do the right things. And so in the end, we came out with a framework that has 3 levels of sales metrics as measured by how manageable they are. So at the highest level, we called these things like revenue or quota achievement or market share. We called those business results. Like, these are organizational outcomes that everyone in the company is striving toward. And interestingly, everyone will take credit for. So if you achieve your quota for the year, if your company hits its target, who'll take credit? Everyone, right? CEO, brilliant leadership. Head of marketing, wonderful alignment with customer needs. Product development, right? Operations guy is going to say, oh, we pumped out the products in the right volume to really hit our targets. And of course, the head of sales is going to be sitting there thinking, well, there's only one person that's responsible for hitting your sales target, head of sales. But it's fair to say that these are organizational outcomes. The middle ground that I talked about, where we could kind of influence these measures, but not really control them, would be sales objectives. And these are things that require consent. So acquiring new customers or selling certain types of products, growing markets, or increasing share of wallet or cross-selling products. These are sales objectives. These are the things that the sales force is asked to accomplish, and the sales force is pretty solely accountable for that. In fact, as I thought about it, I've come to think that the sales objectives are the best measure of how good a sales force is. If you hit your quota or you hit your target, I mean, there are a lot of things that play into that. But if I tell a salesperson to go sell these products to those customers, that's something that's a reasonable ask. And particularly if they're selling more products to more customers, then they're probably doing their job. But the larger point here is that none of this to date, we've discussed about the results or the objectives are actually manageable. So then we had these numbers that we called sales activities, measures of activity, right? So doing call planning, making sales calls, coaching, conducting training, using CRM and other tools that support the sales team. So all these activities that you can actually manage, and they're very satisfying. Unfortunately, only 17% of the metrics in our study were actually sales activities, which means that 83% of all the stuff we're reporting to our sales force and telling them to manage is unmanageable. Right? They can't manage quota. They can't manage customer acquisition. They have to manage the activities that lead to it. And so that's the first of three insights that I want to share with you in the story. The first is that you can only manage activities. It seems kind of obvious when you say it, but there are a lot of people in your organization that are out there trying to manage quota and manage revenue and manage new customer acquisition. And in reality, all they can manage is the sales management and the salespeople's activities and the sales enablement activities. That's all you can manage. And I think this point was punctuated by a conversation I had years ago, actually, as we were putting together our very first training programs. And our training program, the Sales Management Code, which you saw at the bottom of the pyramid, kind of our most foundational program. This is one of the core ideas that we communicate and let people play with and use in exercises, is that you can only manage activities. And so we're rolling this training program out for the first time, and there was a rock star sales manager in this organization. And everyone wanted to have the sales. If you're a sales leader, you wanted the sales manager on your team. If you're a salesperson, you wanted to report to the sales manager. He's just acknowledged as the rock star sales manager. And he raised his hand and he said, "I just want to share with everyone how embarrassed I am at this obvious conclusion that you can only manage sales activities." And everyone looked at him, of course, because he's a rock star. And he said, "I've been a sales manager for 10 years, and I've probably hired, 30 or 40 salespeople over that decade. And on the first day of every salesperson's employment, they sat across from my table and they asked me some version of this question. They asked me some form of, what do you expect me to do? And in every case, I looked back across the desk and I said, I expect you to make your number." And he said, "I now realize that was the silliest thing and least useful thing I could tell someone that just got hired into a sales role with an incentive plan that made it pretty clear I wanted them to make their number." He said, "What they were really asking me is, what do you want me to do? How do I succeed? Like literally, now I'm here, what do I do?" And he said, "If I'd been able to give greater direction for the activities that would have helped them succeed, rather than just telling them I expected them to succeed, a lot of those people would probably still be here. They wouldn't have washed out. In fact, I might be reporting to some of them because they were intelligent, capable, motivated people. They just kind of floundered and didn't know what to do. And their runway wasn't long enough to figure it out by trial and error. We fired them or they got frustrated and left." So this idea that you can only manage activities is actually really critically important, even though it's deceptively simple. It's something that a lot of people struggle with. I don't know, Travis, do you have any comments on that, or should I just keep plugging away here?
No, I mean, this is awesome. And one of my favorite analogies when it comes to this is, if you imagine like a football coach, first day of like spring practice, it doesn't do much good to tell your team, hey, go out and win a championship this year. You tell them how to practice and you tell them how to prepare. And then if they do that, if they work hard in practicing and preparing, then they have a higher likelihood of obtaining that championship. And so, again, this is definitely the results that we've been able to see on our end. And it's awesome that, you've been able to codify this into a high performing framework. What's always interesting, as I'm sure you've run this time and time again, is you have the sales managers that they're like, oh, this is my aha moment. Like, this makes sense. And like, I love this. And then you have the people that aren't quite ready to kind of embrace this methodology. Like they're, maybe for 10, 20, 30 years, they've been focused on those objectives. And it's hard for them to walk away from that per se. And so, yeah, I don't know if you have any like funny anecdotes or stories on that, but we definitely run into that, and you kind of have to like, retrain them into thinking about it from the bottom up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have plenty of anecdotes. I don't know how funny they are because they're kind of sad when you see implications, but it is true. I mean, I think a lot of times that we are more of an education firm than a training firm because we don't spend a lot of time with sales managers working on muscle memory. Like you might with a salesperson practicing asking questions and practicing listening. A lot of times we're just pointing things out. But once the sales manager sees this and thinks about it, they go, "Well, of course. I don't know why I didn't see that. I need to be managing activities." And they just start changing their behaviors. I mean, I think people are attracted to the simplicity of the insight, and they know what to do with it. So it is kind of remarkable, though, that we could have, a million sales managers probably in the United States alone who are out there trying to manage quota, and no one ever pointed out to them that it's just not a great idea. I mean, our research that we've done with our business clients, shows that a little less than half of sales reps are making their quota. And so for all the frustration that we have trying to manage revenue, we deserve it because we can't manage revenue. But let me get some examples here. There are two other ahas, and I get some specific examples. The other aha, once we realized that you can only manage activities, we kept looking at it. We thought, but you know what? There's cause and effect here among these three levels. There's certain activities that lead to certain types of objectives, and certain objectives that lead to certain types of business results. And understanding the chain of events is where you start to exert control, believe it or not, in the Salesforce, which is something that leadership and management always wants, but doesn't always succeed in achieving. And so a couple examples would be, let's just say that you decide to increase the call volume of your sales force, right? You want your sales team to make more calls. And it's a pretty common request, though management doesn't often understand you need to take away other things you're asking them to do to free space for the additional calls. But this is something you should be able to manage, increasing call volume in your sales force. And if you do that successfully, it's likely that your sales team is going to cover more of its territory, which we would consider to be an objective, to cover more territory. And if you cover more territory and the territory is equally fertile, chances are your market share is going to increase. I mean, it's just a logical chain of events that increased volume increases coverage and increases your market share. Or another example that may be even more common is, what if I decide I want to do more prospecting this year? And so kind of shift some of the call volume away from existing accounts, but toward new customers and prospects. And if I do that, all things equal, I should acquire more new customers. I mean, it follows logically as long as the team is skilled and there are people to call on that'll buy. If that happens, your revenue probably will increase unless you have customers leaking out the back door. So more calls equals more prospecting equals more customer acquisition equals more revenue. And so this idea of cause and effect is pretty important, and it leads almost unavoidably to the third conclusion here, which is that you can reverse engineer success. And I would argue this is the single most important goal of sales leadership, is to help their managers and their salespeople reverse engineer what's going to ultimately lead them to success. So the idea here is pretty obvious. You identify the business results you want, and sales, those are given to us, right? Those are called our quotas. But you need to identify the objectives that are going to get you there best or easiest. So, if I'm a sales rep, I have all kinds of paths to making quota. I can sell more stuff. I can acquire more customers. I can sell the same amount of stuff at a higher price point. I can cross-sell and upsell. I mean, there's no shortage of things you can do. The idea is you need to find the things that are going to most likely get you there, and then you can identify the activities that'll take you there, right? So if your objective is to acquire more customers this year, you do more prospecting. If your objective is to grow your existing accounts, you might do more account planning. And so this idea of reverse engineering success is simple, but powerful. And so an example here would be, okay, let's just decide that we want to increase market share this year, right? So that's our path to getting quotas, increasing market share within our existing markets, not pushing into other territories. Then a path there that makes total sense is increasing your share of wallet. And if you're not familiar with the term share of wallet, it's like market share, but at a customer level. So if they're buying $1 million of your products from you and your competitors, what percentage of that $1 million they're buying from you versus your competitors, we call share of wallet. And so, if market share is your goal, maybe share of wallet is your best path there. And if that's the case, then doing more account planning might be the best activity for your managers and your salespeople to engage in. So you can think more strategically about how you're going to increase the share of wallet. What are the conversations you're going to have when you approach your existing accounts? So the final thing I'll say here, and then I'll give a couple more examples, and then Travis will see if we have any questions or if you just want to have a conversation about this. The real insight here is that once you reverse engineer success, so you got to get to quota, you determine there are some paths that are more likely to get there than least likely to get you there, and then you identify the activities that are important. Once you identify those activities, you can focus on the activity. Right? You don't have to obsess over a quota. You can obsess over what your sales team is doing. Again, we think of this from a management perspective, but if you're a salesperson, the insight's the same. You don't have to think about your quota constantly. You have to think about what you need to do Monday morning to get your quota. And so why is this important? Right? So, okay, fine. We got 3 levels of metrics, and there's kind of interaction between the levels and the layers, and you can reverse engineer success, and you can focus on the activity. Well, let me just give you 2 reasons why this is important, at least with the companies that we've worked with. I'll give you one reason from a manager's perspective and one from a salesperson's perspective. If I'm a sales manager, I'm obsessed with getting my team to the quota, right? To getting there to the target. And when that's your point of departure, you can become pretty frustrated by all the options. So you wake up Monday morning, and as I said, what do you do to get your team to quota? There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But if you get to the point of identifying the activities that are important, and you and your sales people agree those are the important activities, you can just focus on that, and it's liberating. When we train sales managers and we get to this point, and they realize they don't have to worry about quota every day, they don't have to worry about acquiring new customers, they don't have to worry about growing existing accounts, they just have to worry about what their 10 salespeople are actually doing. And you don't have to focus on all of the activities, just on the important stuff. It's completely liberating. Sales managers feel like they've been set free from prison, and they can really focus on the important things because now they have a way to identify what is the important stuff. And the other thing I'll say about this is from a salesperson's perspective, which is there's a lot of time spent on and money, more importantly, spent motivating salespeople. And there's some research that was published in Harvard Business Review a while ago, but it doesn't matter how old it is. I think this is just going to be a truth for the generations. They did some research, and they looked into what motivates salespeople. And of course, we all know, money and rewards and recognition, all the stuff that we focus on by way of spending money and allocating praise. But the interesting thing was that wasn't what they found to be most motivating to salespeople. The thing that the researchers found to be most motivating to a salesperson was simply having a clear task, clarity of task. So if you're a salesperson and you know what to do to succeed, right? If you do your account plans, you're going to succeed, you're very motivated to do your account plans. Or if you know that if you make 8 prospecting calls a day, you're going to be successful, you're pretty motivated to make those prospecting calls. But if you are told to make quota and you come up with your own activities and you think that's the right thing to do and you do it and you fail, it's pretty demotivating. This idea of focusing on activities is important because it helps managers and salespeople peel away all the other stuff and focus on what's really important. And it's extremely motivating to have confidence that what you're doing is going to lead to success. And so for those reasons, we think this is as insightful a thing to communicate to your sales team as you can possibly have. Much more insightful than communicating their quota and what their compensation plan is going to be for the year. And then one final thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, on that note, we kind of always half joke here at Ambition that, our long-term goal is that we can, basically tell an employee not only, focus on these activities, but, being able to say, listen, for every phone call you make or for every email you send or for every new demo you book, that's like, putting 80 cents in your pocket or $2 or, something like that, and be able to obviously make it long-term tangible, but then, as you're saying, basically make it to where you can come in and know that you can leave the office and know that you got something done, as opposed to just, hoping that, the last week of the quarter, everything's going to kind of come together.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I know of a sales force. Actually, I was speaking at an event last year sometime, and I just spoken, and then this gentleman got behind me to speak, and I was just kind of just around hearing what he had to say because I'd met him before. He's an interesting guy, and he said that he totally bought into this, and that he had basically done away with financial quotas for his team. He'd done some analysis and identified that the most successful salespeople had certain minimum levels of activity. So they made so many calls, or they set so many appointments, so many meetings. Maybe they sent so many emails. I mean, he had literally done the analysis down to the activity level. And he said that they had done away with financial quotas. Right? So the quota was no longer $500,000 a year in revenue or whatever it was. They set activity quotas. And they literally, that's what they drove toward. People had activity quotas, and they even went as far as compensating them for the activity if they hit certain thresholds of activity. And they did the analysis to understand what's the baseline activity required to succeed. And I asked him, I raised my hand and I said, was that terrifying for you or for the salespeople to get paid for activity? And he said a little bit, but they had the data to back it up. But he said the salespeople loved it because it focused them and motivated them to do the right things, to your very point. And not a lot of people would pay for activity because they don't have confidence that it's going to lead to results. But this guy did, and it was an interesting and innovative way to approach incentives, I thought. And
yeah, that's really inspiring because again, it all makes sense. It's obviously what you back up with research, and it's what, quite frankly, we've built an entire solution around. But yeah, I mean, it's it can be scary to pull the trigger, especially when it almost goes back to the whole thing of you can't get fired for buying IBM. Well, it's you can't get fired for just doing what every sales company has always done, which is just push quota. But it's really kind of flipping things on its head sometimes, where you can see the real results.
Yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, I totally agree. Well, let me just make one more comment here, because when we talk to sales leaders and managers, especially about this, pretty quickly, that if they haven't said it out loud, they've thought that this sounds a lot like micromanagement, right? You want to start managing people's activities. And we've had more than one manager come to us and say, I just don't like the idea. When I was a salesperson, I had a sales manager who micromanaged me, and it was brutal. I hated it. I'm not going to do it. And to our way of thinking, it's our response. Well, what's the option? To not manage people? But the thing that I like to think about is no one likes to be told. No one likes to be told what to do. Right? I have huge control issues. I don't tell me what to do. I hate it. I reject micromanagement as much as anyone. And the truth is, no one likes to be told what to do. However, everyone likes to know what to do. And the point here is not to tell your team what to do. Don't tell them to make 8 prospecting calls, but to coach them and work through it. How do we get there? What is the activity that makes sense to you think? What level of activity makes sense to you? And when the salespeople come to their own conclusion that if they make 8 prospecting calls a day, they're going to succeed, then that's not micromanagement. That's just coaching. And it's managing activity is not about telling people what to do and demanding compliance. It's about coming to consensus as to what's the important stuff and how it needs to be done, and then collaboratively working toward those goals. And I mean, I could give you case study after case study with our clients where this has been revolutionary in the way that management and salespeople thought about their roles. And I can promise you, if you do the right things, your results are going to come. The trick is reverse engineering success, finding the right things and having confidence that those are the right things long enough to actually see the results start to come. Because activities are leading indicators of success. They're not success on their own. But the punchline here is you can only manage activities. You can only manage the activities of yourself and the other people around you, and you need to be very thoughtful about what that is. So everyone registered for this webinar, obviously. We have your email addresses. We're going to email you a couple things at the conclusion here. We're going to send you a couple chapters of the book for free, Cracking the Sales Management Coach. You can just kind of take a peek and see if it's something you might be interested to purchase on your own. Then we also have a really neat ebook we published last year for sales operations professionals, and I suspect a lot of the audience here will be in sales operations or sales enablement. It's a collection of articles that we've written and some interviews with folks from some thought leaders from the industry that you might find useful. So look for that coming soon. Travis, let me just kind of turn it to you if you have some questions, or where do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, for sure. No, so Jason, that was awesome. Really, really great job. And, all of your points are so dead on. And again, it's things that we've learned as we've built ambition. You obviously learned as you built your practice. To one of your last points, I wholeheartely agree that people don't, want to be told what to do. And, I definitely put myself in that camp. And I agree that, it's about coaching and, like the positive implications of being a coach to a player, to a teammate, to an employee. And then, we think a lot about just long-term, we like to throw around, passive performance management. Like what does it actually look like when an employee, especially, in the coming years and decades, like millennials and digital natives, what does it look like when they can sit down and they can basically kind of passively see and own on their own terms, here's what it's going to take for me to be successful, my first quarter here, my first year here, my first 5 years here. And again, it kind of like guides them into, here are the activities you need to do to either hit this quota, which, attains to, this commission check or this promotion or this path. And so, no, again, I think this is obviously where the industry is going. And I think that we're just now at this inflection point of where there's enough companies and enough case studies and enough people like you that are talking about it, where it's kind of really starting to catch on. And, the companies that are getting ahead today implemented this yesterday. And so it's a great time for everybody else to kind of really get on board.
Yep.
So is anybody if anybody has any questions, feel free to write those in, and love to address them with Jason and I. Otherwise, as Jason mentioned, we will definitely, be on the lookout in your inbox for some content we're going to be sending you. Other than that, though, hopefully you've enjoyed, for our American attendees, hopefully you've enjoyed the July 4th weekend and the short work week, and have a great rest of your day.